Hey everyone, we're gonna get started. I'm Lauren Golembiewski. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called FoxAbul. I'm so glad to be here at Voice Summit amongst such an amazing group of speakers and events. This is a really exciting event to be a part of, and I'm really glad that I get to come to the Northeast while Texas is in an immense heat wave, so this is fantastic for me. So my personal mission is to get more designers, UX professionals, writers, and product people into the realm of conversational design. Because honestly, we need these disciplines to be involved in the creation of conversational interfaces. My background is in UX design, and I've worked with agencies as well as startups, but I became really fascinated with conversational technology when my partner and my partner in business and life, CTO of FoxAbul, Matt Buck, and I started making conversational applications that connected our smart speaker to our home automation devices. And it felt really magical to interact with technology and our environment in that way. So from hacking in our home, creating these interfaces and kind of activating our surroundings with our voices, we quit our jobs and we started FoxAbul in 2015. So FoxAbul is a conversational interface agency. Our mission is to advance humanity by building technology that better understands us. We help companies and products design and develop chatbots, voice interfaces like Alexa skills, actions on Google for the Google Assistant, and then conversational interfaces for web and mobile apps. We also guide and teach teams about conversational strategy through workshops and training. And our most recent project was for the South by Southwest event in Austin, Texas. We built the core intelligence and a Facebook Messenger chatbot for South by Southwest this year. So today, I'm gonna cover our design process. We're gonna walk through the conversational interaction loop. I'm gonna talk about in detail my design process that responds to that interaction loop and what the actual interface is between the users and the conversational assistant or agent. And then I'll touch upon the conversation or the user experience that is within conversation itself and how that will influence the design of the conversational interface. And finally, hopefully we have some room for questions at the end. So conversational interfaces aren't really new. We're in this new emergence of them, but why are they really exciting right now? Technology has infiltrated our lives. There's a staggering amount of data and information that is created and that users must confront every day. It allows us to learn on a massive scale, but it's really overwhelming to a lot of people. Users are seeking out simpler interactions, and they want information delivered to them in a better way that they can more easily consume. There are more and more interfaces and touch points that are becoming available to users. So from our new voice-first devices to VR devices to AR devices and every other sensor and technology-enabled thing that will be around us, users are confronting those touch points and they want a consistent and clear interaction with the products that power those various interfaces and touch points. And advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning have democratized access to the technology that makes these interfaces possible, that makes a conversational interaction possible. And we can now leverage large amounts of data to create interfaces and make them more intuitive. And I really love this quote from Erica Hall's book, Conversational Design. Now we can start imagining in an open-ended way what constellation of connected devices any given person will have around them and how we can deliver a meaningful, memorable experience on any one of them. And I think as designers, it should make us rethink the way that we approach typical interface design, the way that we approach users' problems and think about designing a better interface. I especially like that she's calling out designers to look at the entire landscape of the interaction space and not just focus on one particular mode of interaction. We need to focus on the meaning that we deliver to users and not the method by which we get that meaning to them. That kind of comes secondary to the thing that the piece of information and the experience that we're delivering. And conversational design has the opportunity to influence all of these various touch points in the entire landscape of interaction for a user. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how machines can learn to interact with humans in a conversational way. So this is our conversational interaction loop. And I've broken down the interaction of humans interacting with machines to correspond with the way that we converse human to human. So in order for a conversation to take place, a machine needs to be able to listen, it needs to understand, process, and respond. And we're going to break this down. We're going to walk through each one of these in more detail. So first, an interface needs to be able to listen. When a human is speaking to a machine, the machine needs to understand the collection of sounds coming out of the human's mouth as distinct words and text. And that technology has not always been available. The technology that does power that for us in the voice space is automatic speech recognition. And this is a good visualization of the way that automatic speech recognition works in Google's voice search. So you can see that as I'm speaking to the search, it is creating a model of what it thinks the sounds coming out of my mouth is actually saying in text. And it's updating that model as I speak, contextually based on the other things that I'm saying. And while automatic speech recognition is delivered through technology that we don't necessarily touch as designers, like browsers. It's built into the Alexa. It's built into Google Assistant, and it's within a lot of our operating systems on our phones and our computers. While we don't touch that particular technology, we need to understand the limits and the capabilities of the technology. We need to think about how it might handle things like background noise and different accents and dialects, and truly understand how reliable automatic speech recognition is for our users. In textual interfaces, it's a little bit easier. Our users can send us raw text already, so there's no translation layer between sounds coming out of someone's mouth, their voice, and the actual raw text. But we also have affordances that are made available to us through popular messaging channels. These are some of the affordances available in Facebook Messenger. And these allow us to package information and give users a small set of interactive visual components that they can interact with. And it might streamline the interaction with users, because instead of having to type out every response, they can simply tap on what they want to do. So now that our machine can actually listen to our users either through automatic speech recognition or through an input in a text messaging platform, we need to understand what that text means. We need to teach machines how to understand that raw text and extract structured data. And we do this through natural language understanding. NLU does just that. It extracts data from messy human speech. So we're also starting to be able to extract more things from users, the text that users send to us. We're starting to try to analyze emotion and sentiment, and we can use those data points to influence our interfaces as well. But here's an example of some of the structured data that might be pulled out of a user's utterance, or that messy speech that a user spoke into Alexa. And NLU happens usually on other platforms as well. So it's built into platforms like Alexa. We can use it as a service on platforms like Dialogflow and Microsoft Lewis, Rasa, and IBM Watson. And then there's also teams that are building custom NLU models with data scientists and computational linguists. But I think what's really great is that we have now reached a point where we can all sign up for free for a platform and start interacting with an NLU model immediately. It's really been democratized and made accessible to individual designers and developers to build understanding into their machines. So once we have that meaning that's extracted from the text that users have sent to us or what they've spoken, we need a system or logic for how to handle that information. And we call this bot intelligence. We need to process that information, and we need to account for the various states of the user, the state of the conversation, and the state of the application. So the state of the user might be their mental state. You might know that in this particular moment, users are likely to be pretty happy, or users are likely to be pretty angry. And we may modulate the way our interface responds depending on the user's state. We may even modulate it based on their location or other information that we pull from other sources of data. Then the conversational state is kind of where we are in the conversation in this moment. We need to understand that if we're expecting a yes or no answer to a question, that when the user says yes, that we're actually able to match that yes to the question we just asked. So we're carrying on a context within the conversation. We need to manage that state. And then there's also the state of the application. What API calls might we be making? Is the API even working right now? Is our server down? And all of this happens in the bot intelligence and allows us to process the information that the user sent us, all with the goal of performing actions and delivering a response back to the user. And finally, we need to deliver that response, actually speak it back to the user or send a message back to them. So hopefully our action is successful and we're able to respond back to the user with a piece of information. Sometimes we have to respond with a prompt to ask for more information from the user. But the way that we do that in a voice interface is through synthesized voices most commonly. We can also use pre-recorded audio or voiceover. And in messaging applications, we're again going to use those messaging app affordances. We're going to package the information that we need to deliver back to the user so that they can interact with it in the best way possible. We want to package that information well. We don't want to just send them a bunch of raw text if that's not the best way, so we can employ some of those affordances to better package and deliver meaning to the user. So this is the entire conversational interaction loop. And this is what we kind of need to think about as we design the conversational system that is going to attempt to understand users and respond back to them. And this is really what we're going to map to our conversational design process. Our process really mirrors that interaction loop. We listen to users as a part of our design process. We listen to users through research methods and strategy. We understand users we create an understanding of our users by an affinity mapping exercise and defining the entities in the system, as well as mind mapping. We process the information, we create a system that can process the information by developing conversational flow diagrams. And then we craft our responses back to the user through branding, writing, and UI elements. So now we're going to dive into each one of these components more deeply. So, like me, a lot of folks start with this fascination of the mode of interaction. Interacting with your surroundings via voice is really exciting. And a lot of teams and people jump directly into platforms and tools that can help them do that. And that's really great for experimentation and understanding the limits of what's available to you. But when we start to build these interfaces for real users, we need to set aside all those fancy new platforms and tools and just listen to our users and understand what they truly need. I can't tell you how many teams who have started down the path of choosing a tool and figuring out what platform they're going to build on, and they haven't even figured out what experience they're building for the user or if that's the right experience. So you need to truly listen to your users, understand what they need, or you might deliver a really poor experience and a project might fail, not because the experience was necessarily bad, it was just wrong. So I've outlined a few questions that you should think about answering before you design a conversational interface. And obviously there's so many other questions you could be thinking about as you think about your particular use case and your particular set of users. Okay, but how should you go about listening to those users? What should you actually do? This is a great time to engage with user research experts or put on your user research hat yourself. You want to uncover insights from your users. So a great place to start is by analyzing the conversations your users are already having with the business or interface that might exist, and what content they're engaging with. Oftentimes we perform what we call a conversation audit. If any of you are familiar with a content audit, this is very similar to a content audit, but we're looking at not just the content the users are interacting with, but the conversations that they're having. So whether it's in a support channel, via email, in social media, we want to analyze all the various ways that users are already conversing with our company, because that's going to tell us a lot about their expectations, their needs, and how we can best support a conversational interaction for those same users. You could also just talk to users and listen to them directly. Interviewing users is a great way to understand their needs and desires and their journeys to accomplishing their goal. And we found that the jobs to be done framework is a really great way to frame our research and product discovery. Are y'all familiar with jobs to be done? No? So it was originally developed by Harvard business school professor Clayton Christensen, and it was a method for reframing the product as something that users hire to accomplish a job for them. So your users are hiring your product to accomplish a job. And when we drill down into jobs to be done, we're really thinking about what job are users trying to get done and what are the ways they're currently getting that job done, because that job is most likely getting done, but it's probably happening in a bunch of other places. So if we want to help users get their jobs done better, we need to look at how they're currently getting those jobs done and where a conversational interface or any interface can really improve that job accomplishment. So after we've performed research and gathered data and insights, we will often form a goal about what we think our interface can accomplish. And we need to synthesize a lot of the research and data that we've gathered. And the way that we do this is through affinity diagramming. This is the famous post-its on walls activity that you've probably seen in every UX workshop or UX company. But an affinity diagram is a collaborative artifact that we create where, for conversational interfaces, we're jotting down what we think users might say or what we've already seen users ask of the interface. And again, it's a way for us to synthesize our research and our data, come together, and talk about what the user's mindset is when they approach our conversational interface. So in our exercise, we get our team together, we individually write down the utterances onto sticky notes. Then we come together and bring and post them on walls, and then we start to cluster and group them based off of users' goals. And we work collaboratively to discuss what these utterances actually mean. What are the assumptions behind what the user is saying? What are the possible pitfalls that the user might run into if they approach an interface in this way? Or how can our interface best respond to those users' assumptions? We might talk about how those conversations might play out. This is a really great place to talk about, okay, if the user says this, how might we respond? And this really helps teams visualize the mental models that users are bringing to the conversational interface. And ultimately, it informs the intents and the training utterances, as well as the entities that we use when we're building our natural language understanding models. So clustering utterances into groups is very similar to putting together an intent based on training phrases or what the user says. But we're really thinking about this from the user's perspective, and we're not trying to impose too much structure to what the user is saying, because they have no knowledge of that structure. They're not responding to a known application necessarily. So we really want to think about what is the raw user's mental model as they approach something like an Alexa or a blinking cursor in a messaging interface. So the affinity map helps us model the user's frame of mind. But our next step is to really describe the important aspects of the system. And we do this through entity definition. So this is a little bit different than entity definition that might happen when you're building an NLU model, but it's pretty similar. We're gonna look at those utterances that we just maybe posted on the wall or we've used in a collaborative whiteboarding tool. My favorite collaborative whiteboarding tools are Draw.io, Real-Time Board, and Mural. Those are all fantastic ways to do this virtually, so you don't have to be in a physical space together. You can do this virtually across the team. But if you take a look at those utterances, you can start to identify the important data elements within them that will actually help perform the action that the user wants to get done. So in this utterance, which is a flight search, we can see that there's some important information the user's giving us. They want flights from Austin to Newark, leaving next Friday after 4 p.m. Okay. So Austin is the departure, is the departure city. Newark is the arrival city. We need to know the date, maybe the time. And these are all things that are necessary to perform a flight search in a system. Those are the important data elements that will help us get the user's goal accomplished. But we also have other objects that the user might be interacting with. We might know their name, their preference, location. We may have underlying objects in the system like APIs or departments of our business or the actual humans that they might ultimately talk to. And all of these are really important to clarify and define. So it's really important to document these entities, document the objects in your system, give them clear labels and names, as well as complete definitions. I don't know how many of you have been on an interface design project and designers call something one thing, engineers call it another thing, salespeople have a completely different name. So this documenting and actually creating clear definitions is actually what helps distribute that shared understanding across a team as you're building these interfaces. So there's no longer a question as to what an event means when you're talking to an engineer. You don't have to go back and clarify. You can create a shared understanding. And doing this through entity definition has been really helpful to align teams across a lot of different disciplines and departments. And we really encourage having deep philosophical discussions about what these things mean in the system. Ultimately, these concepts and these data elements have really impactful consequences when you start to design a system that's using them. So when you're passing this off to an engineer that has one concept of what that thing means, where the salesperson talks to a customer with a completely different perception of what that means, there can be a lot of churn just within your interface, within your sales process. You could lose business, and you could everything could cost more money to build. So entity definition is a really important step in creating that understanding of the underlying system. Once we've identified and defined the various entities and objects within the system, we need to model the relationships between all of those things. We need to actually understand how they all relate to each other. We do this through building mind maps. And this exercise helps us create a model that a model of the information system, and it informs our entire design process, from the entities that we ultimately encode into our natural language understanding model to the responses, the data that we put into responses, and the interface elements that we use. It's kind of like a sketch of the system's information model. And we want to develop it from a user-centered perspective. So by starting with kind of this high-level research and insights from users, moving on to kind of systematizing what users are saying in affinity diagramming, identifying entities from within those affinity diagrams, and then using those entities to connect various relationships, we're truly taking the user's mental model and trying to bake it into our information system, which means that when users interact with our system, it'll be better able to respond to their mindset. So once you've developed a clear understanding of your users and how they relate to the information system, we can start to build the structure of how the conversational interface will handle the various logic within the system. The states that I talked about, like the state of the user, the state of the conversation, and the state of the application. So we do this by creating conversation flows. And these flows really map out all the various types of interactions that the user will have. And we do this from the perspective of the user. We're going to start with one of those utterances that we've identified, and we're going to start to connect it to the various decisions and responses that the interface will give back to the user, and ultimately lead them down to their goal, as well as show how all the other ways that path might deviate along the way. So maybe a user gives us more or less information in that initial utterance, in their initial prompt to the system. And we need to ask for more information before we can actually help them accomplish their goal. Maybe there's various options that they might discover as they converse with our system, and we need to navigate them to the right path to a goal they necessarily didn't even know they had when they started. So creating that processing or that bot intelligence really comes down to how we're mapping out our conversations for the users. And we're creating these conversational flow diagrams. It's, again, usually on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, in a collaborative whiteboarding tool like Real-Time Board. The main thing to keep in mind is that you should just follow a consistent diagramming language. So you should clearly indicate what our user utterance is, where are the decision points, what are the responses, and what are any of the labels in between, where you might want to label something like a context of the conversation or an assumed piece of data that you might be bringing with you into that conversation. And once you have this conversational structure in place, you can actually use it to prototype the interactions before you implement the conversation. You can act out the interactions. You can use the conversational flow to actually build a script and act it out between two people, which is a really great way to just test how natural and how realistic that conversation actually sounds and how usable it might be to the user. You can also employ the Wizard of Oz method, which is a testing strategy where you take that conversational structure that you've mapped out and you use it to kind of pretend to be the interface. So you might be acting it out behind a machine, the wizard, and the user thinks that they're just interacting with a typical Alexa skill or a messaging app. And this Wizard of Oz method helps to kind of reveal that user assumption, that user's mental model that you might not have anticipated with your previous, your kind of upfront user research. And then you can also, there's a lot of prototyping tools emerging on the market. I think SaySpring was acquired by Adobe, but there's Storyline and a few others which are really great for quickly putting together some conversational interactions, some voice interactions that you can test in real time, through, you can use a WYSIWYG builder to build out the interactions, and then you can test them on a real device, kind of as if it was a real application. And those prototyping tools are really great for testing. They take a little bit more investment in kind of composing all of the conversational structure inside of each individual tool, but it's a really approachable way for designers to test out the interaction that they're building. So one of the reasons it's so important to understand users through research, as well as prototype and test the interactions that you've built from that understanding of your users, is because conversational interaction is really complex. So now I'm going to take a moment to break down the nature of conversational interaction that designers should think about as they talk to users, as they design the interactions, and as they test them. So these 9 qualities of conversation are just some of the things that influence a conversational interaction. We're going to take a look at these as how they impact human-to-human conversation, and then relate them to how a machine can best address some of these qualities of conversation. So conversation is assumed to be intuitive. For most people it is. For some it's not. And a lot of times we take for granted how intuitive conversation is to us. As we start to think about how we might break it down and systematize conversation, we can see that it's much more complicated and nuanced than we're really even aware of. Some people do a lot of these things, and I know I personally do a lot of my conversational thinking just intuitively. I'm not making necessary conscious decisions about everything that I'm saying and interacting with someone. But machines make us conscious of the effort to communicate. When a user approaches a machine, all of a sudden they're kind of questioning the intuitive nature of the conversational interaction they might have. They might think, oh no, I need to know how to use this, or what's the right thing to say? So we should try to support as much of an intuitive interaction as possible, but also realize that intuitiveness might be broken down by the very nature of a human interacting with a machine. So conversations naturally revolve around distinct topics. And we call those threads. Those threads kind of create a path for us, and they branch off into new paths. And those are new topics that might have originated out of another one. Threads are a really meaningful way for us to describe the various kind of chunks of conversation. And they help us organize those conversations so that machines can automate them. So we also assume that there's a level of collaboration in every conversation that we have as humans. When you're speaking to someone, you're approaching them, you're usually working together to create a shared understanding and talk about the same thing. I'm sure you have all been in situations where that shared understanding is completely broken down. I know that I have. But generally, if we want to have good communication, we're going to follow some of the rules of cooperation when we engage in conversation. These are also known as Grice's maxims, developed by language philosopher Paul Grice. And these were some of the aspects, the aspects of conversation and cooperation that he identified when people were working together and having conversations. So we try to give as much information as we can without giving too much or too little. We try to be truthful by not giving false information or info that's not supported by evidence. We try to give information that's relevant and pertinent to the situation. And then a final one that was identified again in Erica Hall's conversational design is politeness. So we try to give options and not impose on people. And I think that last one is really important when we start to think about how machines are automating conversations, because that sense of politeness and giving options and kind of trying to meet your users where they are is really important to make those users have a good experience. Just like in typical conversations, you would never expect a product or a company to get in a shouting match with you like you might have in personal conversations. So that level of politeness is very important when we start to think about having these conversations with users. So conversation is also very empathetic. When we're creating that shared understanding with users, we're constantly trying to anticipate what other people, the person we're communicating with, is thinking and feeling, and what they're even assuming about us. And these assumptions help us kind of fast track. As I stepped up to the podium today, I didn't have to define what an interface is to all of you, because I've assumed that you maybe have an understanding of what interfaces are, because you're at Voice Summit, you're at a technology conference. And that assumption kind of helped me fast track and not bore you with information that you likely already know. And we do that every day. We don't start from ground zero at every conversation. We use a lot of contextual information that we might already know, and just the situation to kind of anticipate what people are already thinking and what we think they're thinking about us. So we're also assuming that a lot of people have this understanding, and that's called theory of mind. So this inference into what other people are thinking and feeling is generally easy for humans to do. Some cognitive disorders make it really difficult, but it's also really difficult for machines to create this kind of theory of what its users' minds already know and assume and are bringing to the table that is unspoken. But Google's DeepMind research division released a paper earlier this year, and they're developing a theory of mind neural network. So they're actually trying to train models to understand theory of mind, which is incredibly fascinating. So who knows when that'll be available for all of us to use and try to understand this kind of complex assumptions that users are making when they approach something or approach an interface. But it's really exciting that we're even starting to think about that level of intuition in the conversational interface. Language is also incredibly emotional. A lot of the times what we're communicating is emotion, even more than information. And it can evoke a very strong emotional response to users. I've seen in the voice space, the very nature of having a conversational interaction where we're using our words and we're interacting something that's speaking directly to us creates a much more intimate connection between the user and the machine. We automatically start to anthropomorphize the interface that we're interacting with when we have these conversational interactions. People refer to Alexa as her and say, she doesn't like me, or she's my best friend, which are all things that people have just done on their own. I mean, we do it every day when we see faces in like a car grill. We anthropomorphize things, and we imbue and project our own emotions onto these interfaces. So it's really important to also consider how users are going to evoke the emotional responses they're having with words. And so more advances are being made on this front, beyond just sentiment analysis, which is a pretty, not very nuanced view of emotion. There are teams that are trying to derive more emotional meaning from the words that users are speaking to a conversational interface. And they're doing that from both word choice as well as in the voice space, looking at things like pitch and modulation and how quickly users are speaking to try to understand the emotions that they're experiencing. So as a designer, You should consider how users are expressing those words and how your interface might be able to best respond to those emotional reactions from users. So conversations exist in a temporal space, which means that when we're in a conversational interaction or interacting with a conversational interface, information really isn't persistent. This is especially true in voice interfaces. So in a text messaging app, we might receive a text message and more messages are coming in as we have the conversation. Information is kind of scrolling out of view. But we might be able to scroll back up and reference what happened previously, and we kind of have a timeline. But in a voice interface, that information is delivered in real time. So not only is it temporal, but it's attentive, which means that users have to pay attention to the voice interaction as it's being spoken back to them. I do this like every other day. I ask Alexa what the weather is going to be, and I immediately stop listening to her response and just like start doing other things that I was getting ready for my day. And I'm like, I didn't hear what the weather was going to be like. So I have to ask her again because I wasn't paying attention, even though I prompted that same response. I mean, I do that a lot to my fiance too. I'll ask him a question and immediately stop listening. I'm sure we all do that. But this attentive nature of conversations really means that we have to hold users' attention. We have to understand that that attention is going to be hard to hold, and the way that we do that is by crafting really great responses. And also delivering the appropriate amount of information just as it's needed. No more or no less. So this kind of also relates to some of those previous things that we were talking about in the cooperative principles and Grice's maxims. But I think it's really important as we start to look at this temporal and attentive nature of conversational interfaces that information needs to be delivered in a way that users can quickly understand and kind of move on and not really give them a whole bunch more that is irrelevant because they'll probably just stop listening anyway. Conversation is also environmental. So the set and setting that users are in will dictate the way that they talk. Our environment gives us cues as to how we should be talking. So I speak very differently when I'm at home than when I'm at the office or talking to a client. We obviously don't use the same types of conversational interactions when we're speaking with our family members as we would when we're speaking with our bosses, because that wouldn't be appropriate. So conversational designers should really think about how the set and setting affects their users. And not only just like the social cues, but how it could materially affect the way that users might be able to interact. So are they going to be in a place where there's a likelihood of a lot of noise and distraction? Asking for a bus schedule, there's a high likelihood that the user could be out on the street in a noisy street trying to get a bus schedule, and having a voice interaction might not be the easiest unless they're wearing earbuds. And then also just like, is it appropriate to be speaking out loud? How many of you work in open office spaces and you try to duck into one of your little phone booths to have a private conversation, but that's not always easy. And so we need to think about how the settings and the environments that our users are likely to be in and how that will affect the way that they can interact. Conversation is really unpredictable. So if you've ever observed a conversation happening like amongst groups of friends, you can see how it is just ping-ponging all over the place. People are talking over each other, there's side conversations, people diverted by new gossip, and you're like, oh wait, we have to talk about something else. You can see how much conversations shift and evolve on just immediately without notice. Even between two people, conversation can dramatically shift. You can walk into a conversation having one goal, and that goal can be completely changed by the time you get to the end of the conversation, or just okay, well, that was a completely different topic. This is another great example of this is like how many of you go to the doctor thinking like, I have this many things to talk to the doctor about, and you leave the office and you're like, I only talked about one of them. So great, I guess there's still things on my list. There's always an unpredictable nature of conversation. So we try to employ like a choose your own adventure style of navigation. Designers should think about their users being able to jump to any other topic really as they need to, or at any given time when they're interacting with the conversational interface. Because they will try to jump wherever they want to. You may think, oh no, our users are gonna follow our perfectly designed paths and it'll be fine. But I can tell you that after seeing many conversational interface kind of come through the ringer of user testing, it doesn't happen that way. Users will always try to invoke another thing that they forgot or go back and change something that they just said, because this is what we do in normal conversation every day. We're really good at handling this when we're two humans who are talking, because we use things like reprompting each other and clarifying. Which brings me to my next point. Not only is it unpredictable, but it's incredibly error prone. The unpredictable nature definitely contributes to conversations being error prone, but just generally we're always gonna make mistakes when we're in conversations. This is one of the things we take for granted as humans having conversation, because we're really good at kind of accounting for those errors. We use body language, we ask for clarification, we use reprompts. My favorite device in client discussions or any discussion is repeating what I thought that person just said back to me. Like, okay, we're on the same page. So we do this a lot to try to prevent errors. And in conversational design, we need to spend a lot of time on handling and preventing errors, as they're most certainly going to happen. And in fact, that can be where you spend most of your time when you're building a conversational interaction, is not just accounting for the user accomplishing their goal, but accounting for all of the ways that the user might be deviated from accomplishing that goal. So these 9 qualities of conversation are things the designer should take with them as they think about creating those conversation flows in building and writing the interfaces and writing the responses. And these will really kind of power how you approach a conversational system and think about the user's experience in conversation. So we've mapped out the conversation flows that dictate all of the various states of the user, the conversation, and the interactions that will happen within them. And we have those qualities that we've maybe like iterated on those flows because we've taken a look at all the different unpredictable ways that the conversation can deviate. We've handled a lot of different errors, and maybe we've even discovered like new entities within our system or objects because we have a new data source, or some engineer wrote us a new API that gives us access to new information. It's really important to iterate upon all of those systems and artifacts as you go and as you build your conversational interface. But now that we have all this structure in place, we need to spend a lot of time on composing the way the conversational interface will actually respond to the user. There's a lot of work ahead of us in crafting all of the ways that the conversational interface will respond and deliver information to users. Branding is what dictates how companies communicate with their customers. And designers must evolve that brand for the conversational interaction space, because it's paramount to delivering great conversational interfaces. I mean, any interface really needs a strong brand foundation to be successful. So assuming that a company has already built a great brand foundation with a mission statement and a set of values, and maybe even some messaging that they've aligned upon, The way that we frame branding in the conversational interface is through voice, tone, and persona. Voice is the quality of the words that our conversational interface will use, that will speak back to the user based on those values and the mission statement. Tone is the way that voice modulates for specific situations. And persona is the characteristics or the personality that embodies that voice and tone. So like I said, because conversational interfaces are so intimate and emotional, users will also often personify machines they're talking with. So this is why a lot of brands choose to create names and avatars and kind of give a human element to their conversational brand. That's not necessarily great for every interface, because it's going to be hard to remember the names of every single interface we might want to interact with. But we still want to build a strong profile that will power the personality of our conversational interface, regardless of whether we're using some name or avatar or separate entity that embodies that. So we build personality profiles. We create kind of a document that outlines what the brand might look like. If it has an embodied character, we'll create avatars, maybe a lot of variations of that avatar, animations that can be used in the conversational interface. We'll give it a name. We'll build some background information, like its location, its birthplace, its age. Maybe it has some superpowers or a driving kind of motivational story that powers its kind of perspective. And then we also need to outline how that voice, the personality that's embodying that voice, how it will shift given the key moments that users encounter in a conversational interface. So these are some of the key moments and tonal shifts that we've identified that kind of span across a lot of different conversational interfaces. Each individual interface will probably have different key moments that are most important to it. But we're looking at generally how the interface will introduce itself, how it will orient the user, how it will guide the user, instruct the user, and alert or notify the user to information. So introduction, orientation, guidance, and instruction are from Erica Hall's conversational design book. And then we added that fifth one of notification or alert, because that's a really important aspect to delivering conversational information. So if you're extending an existing brand, you really need to think about how it will be embodied in these conversational interfaces. And that will likely include collaboration with your brand and marketing teams. So this isn't happening just with the designers who are working on the conversational interface. This should happen across the company and should really be something that aligns the conversational interface to the entire experience that the company offers. I've seen a lot of teams build their own names and avatars for brands, and they deliver it, and customers are notably confused by all these various names and avatars that they're now interacting with. And then the brand teams are kind of angry that they were usurped because they would have wanted a more considerate process in kind of controlling and maintaining the brand. If you talk to a marketer, brand is king. And so if you step on their toes, they're gonna get angry, and they might not give you the attention that will drive, eyeballs and ears to your conversational interface. So be friendly with marketers and work with them and develop a brand that is gonna work across your entire organization. It's not just about that one touch point, it's about that entire constellation of devices. So it's important to definitely come from a foundation of strong branding that is aligned to the way your team and your interface is already branding itself. And it's also important to test out these various expressions. If you're creating a bunch of new brand assets, you want to understand how users are going to interact with those brand expressions. So the various interface elements, the various styles of writing, the various personalities that your bot might have, you're likely going to generate a lot of ideas. And those ideas should be tested, and you should measure maybe the impact that it will have on the users. It's also a really great way to just ground everyone in a user-centered perspective to design. So based on the established brand and using those conversation maps that we built that have dictated kind of the various types of interactions that our users will have with the conversational interface and all the different paths they could take and the various responses that the interface might have to deliver back to the user, we need to actually really craft and hone the language and the words that our conversational interface uses. That's the core user interface element. Words are the most elemental part of conversation. So you need to spend a lot of time carefully crafting the words that your conversational interface uses. They also contain a massive amount of words. So as you start to build a conversational interface and you think about a simple conversational interaction, and then you see how in your conversational diagram it maps out to a bunch of different branches. And you can see like, oh my gosh, this one simple conversational interaction actually contains so many words and responses because now we're accounting for all of these different situations that could happen. And typically, like, you're collaborating across teams to build this. There's no more one single designer or writer that can sit down and write this entire interface. It's just not really wieldy. One writer doing that is maybe going to take a way too long of time. You need multiple people focusing on these things at the same time to move at the pace that technology needs to move. So it's important to document systems that drive consistency across teams who are crafting the words of an interface. And those systems should be founded on core principles. The principles that underlie your brand, but also principles that underline the kind of conversational approach that your application is taking to the problem. And documenting these principles helps you distribute it across a team and work together to build a cohesive conversational interaction. The principles are also likely to be influenced heavily by your use case and your problem set and the understanding that you have of your users. But here are a few principles that we've seen pop up time and again with when we're working with teams to build their interfaces. So writing responses to deliver the most meaning and as few words as possible is really important. Again, that attentive nature of the conversational interface means that every extra word you're delivering to a user isn't an opportunity for a user to stop paying attention to what you're saying. And again, iterate and minimize again. Even when you've thought you've cut all unnecessary words, step away, come back, and try again to rephrase, eliminate information, maybe reformat sentences to make the action or the most important part of the sentence in the front of the response, because again, we're trying to respond to that attentive nature. So you've done all this work to create a beautiful brand for your conversational interface, and everyone gets super excited about their personality and their brand. But you should really apply that personality really sparingly to the conversational interface. Because if you don't apply it in the appropriate way, it's just going to become extra words that make the user stop paying attention. But I've seen it happen time and again. You're so excited about that brand, that personality, that you walk in and you're like, okay, how can we make this personality the best it can be? It's not about the personality. It's about the meaning of the information you're trying to deliver to the user. and the personality is just the package. So you should really think about just sprinkling that personality on. In fact, stripping away all personality and then just adding it just a little bit at the end is the best way to really deliver a strong conversational brand and personality. And then, of course, employ those user interface elements. Use them where it's going to make the user interaction easier. So on a voice interface, we don't have a lot of elements. You know, we might have ways to phrase questions that make it easier for users to respond. We might give them options so that they don't have to think of a response, you know, out of thin air. But in text messaging interfaces or chatbots, those types of conversational interfaces, we can actually deliver buttons to users. And we should just let them tap a button rather than type out a sentence if that's easier. So it's important to employ those user interface elements. So again, as you start to create more principles that drive your conversational tone and the way that you really deliver the words to your users, it's really important to document them, collaborate, and systematize them across your entire team. So there's a really great example that I love of how a team created a consistent voice and a style of writing. Have any of you guys seen Won't You Be My Neighbor, the Mr. Rogers documentary lately? Okay, so I just saw it. I love Mr. Rogers. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, so like he's so near and dear to my heart. But Mr. Rogers' personality is so kind of core to the content that he delivers to children, right? And he's not, you know, he's not the sole person who's delivering that. He actually has a team of, it's a television show. He has a team of writers and other people who are delivering and writing his shows. And last month, The Atlantic published an article that outlines how Mr. Rogers' personality was documented and systematized amongst his writers. And they build it out in a little pamphlet called Let's Talk About Freddish. So if you're familiar with Mr. Rogers, he had the latter half of his career was talking about important issues. So it was like, let's talk about violence, or let's talk about divorce. And those are some of the things he covered with children. So this is a fun way for them to package, let's talk about Freddish. And Freddish is what they call the actual voice of writing for Fred Rogers. And they actually outlined very specific rules where they would take a piece of dialogue or something Mr. Rogers would say, and they would refine that message through taking it through these rules that they've developed. So a couple of those rules are, or I guess here's the first rule. State the idea you wish to express as clearly as possible in terms preschoolers can understand. So that's pretty good advice for anyone who's writing an interface. Maybe not preschoolers, but you know, make your information approachable. And so an example that they give, they actually back up all of these rules with examples, which is really important to aligning writers on how those rules actually influence the words they're composing. So that example is, it is dangerous to play in the street. Okay, that's a pretty clear message. It is dangerous to play in the street. But then their next rule is rephrase it in a positive manner. So they rephrase that sentence to say, it is good to play where it is safe. So they've kind of transformed the words and the language and the tone based on these very clearly developed rules that help all of their writers kind of align to a single voice and tone. And I think there's like 10 or 12 different rules that they've outlined in that article. And it's just such a great example of how a team kind of came together, dissected the actual essence of the way a voice is expressed through language, and then systematized it through a set of rules that all of their writers can follow. Now, like, that's not always going to give you like the perfect response every single time, but it's a fantastic place to start. And I have seen on many teams that aligning on how to express some of these qualities that we've defined in our branding, like being nerdy or being excited. Those are really hard and abstract things for us to all wrap our minds around. We all have a different understanding of what that truly means. So when you're writing on a team, creating these rules not only helps you stay consistent from you as a writer today versus you as writer 6 months from now has completely different perspectives on what certain things mean. Even the moments that you're kind of going through in life might change your perspective on what things mean. But individual writers and designers all have different perspectives on what words and qualities and personalities mean. So these rules are a really helpful way to align and collaborate on writing conversational interfaces. And it's a really iterative process. I heard someone throw out the term writer's room when talking about developing these conversational interfaces or conversational responses. And I think that's a really great way to think about how we write today in conversational interfaces, which is typically one copywriter is given an assignment and they're sitting there and they're writing the interface and then they deliver it, or one UX writer is given a wireframe and they come in and they change all the copy and maybe make some other notes and then they pass it along. So we can't really work in those silos anymore because we're all trying to build this shared understanding and respond to a complex interaction or a complex kind of approach that our users are bringing. And so sitting together and actually talking about the things that we're writing, throwing out ideas, dissecting what the things actually mean, saying wait, explain what that means, or why did you phrase it this way, or why this word and not this word, actually helps you drill down to the individual choices you're making when you compose a response in language. So it's really important to do this iteratively, collaboratively, get together in a room, virtually or physically, and talk about how your interface is really going to express the meaning to its users. So after we've kind of developed all these artifacts, we've developed affinity diagrams. We've created a document that outlines all the important entities and objects in the system. We've created a mind map that helps us model the way the information of the system works. We've created conversation maps that kind of dictate all the ways that conversations can flow and how they'll actually move in various paths. And finally, we've probably created some documents that outline our principles around branding and language and writing. All of that kind of leads us to finally being able to deliver the interface. So this is where development comes in. This is where we start to pass and work with developers to both build those artifacts and for them to take those artifacts and build them into code, engineer them. Now, I'm not an engineer, so I don't actually develop conversational interfaces. But I think it's really important for designers to work closely with engineers throughout the entire process. Because, like I said, those affinity diagrams that you're creating are ultimately going to influence the natural language understanding model. Those entities that you define will maybe even influence the API documentation that gets written. The conversational flows are actually what developers are going to take and use to implement all the logic of the system. Collaborating with developers throughout the entire project process is incredibly important. And it's also important to try to understand the way that they think about the conversational system. They're going to have a different perspective. They're maybe going to be thinking about scalability, what's possible given the tools that they have available to them, ways that they're actually going to deliver and best use the various platforms like Alexa or Google Assistant. So developers and engineers are an invaluable resource for designers, and it's best if you can sit next to one or be engaged to one, start a company with one. But if you can't, then you should just try to gain as much of an understanding about the development process as you can. So when we build conversational interfaces, I'm a lot of times helping to build the natural language understanding models and start to build some of the logic that's within that conversational interface. Because as you deliver the interface, it's really important to then test and analyze it. And I think when designers start to get closer and closer to how the logic of the interface actually works, the analysis and the testing that happens after it's been delivered will make a lot more sense to you. You'll be able to influence that system better and actually advocate for the user in a more direct way. So I'll back up for a second. There's a lot of different NLU platforms out there. Dialogflow, IBM Watson, Amazon Lex are all great out-of-the-box tools you can use. Raza is an open source tool that you can use if you're concerned about security or being on premises and having your code kind of not in the cloud and managed by other large companies. There's development frameworks that have been created specifically for this space. Jovo, which I believe they're represented at Voice Summit. BotPress, Salesforce is creating one called Violet, Microsoft Bot Framework. These frameworks help engineers actually build that logic, and they're accounting for a lot of the nuance and way these systems work in the conversational space as opposed to a typical GUI web application that we're maybe more familiar with. So then after you've delivered that interface, the testing and the analysis happens through these purpose-built analytics tools. There's ones that have been built for chat, there's ones that have been built for voice, and they try to analyze the specific aspects of conversation that are most representative of the way the user is experiencing the interface. So they'll look at things like how users kind of move through the conversation, the various paths that they take. They'll look at things like the missed responses, the misunderstood responses, and the unsupported responses, or the unsupported utterances, sorry. The utterances that are missed, the utterances that are misunderstood, and the utterances that are unsupported in the interface. And those are all really important those are all really important data elements to capture that will help you improve and evolve your interface. Because that's also a really important aspect of conversational interfaces. Just like when we all learned to talk, we were constantly evolving, and we still evolve in our language and our understanding and the way that we speak to people. So our conversational interfaces need to do a similar thing. It can't be making the same mistake over and over again, because the users will very quickly lose all faith in that interface and abandon it and be very unlikely to return. So designers being familiar with the analytics tools, with the way that it displays analytics, and developing methods to iterate upon the interface. So a good way to do that is thinking about how to create a very regular process by which you go into the analytics tools and you actually are trying to look at all the data maybe every other day, every week, every few days. And you may change that kind of cadence of how often you're looking at the analytics and updating the interface depending on how mature your interface is. So very early in the interface, you're probably updating it maybe every day. Just like, I feel like a toddler, what is the statistic of how many new words a toddler learns a day? It's like, that's what we're thinking about when we introduce our toddler conversational interface. We're trying to introduce to it new concepts and new words every day, because we know that our users are gonna come to that interface with things that we could not anticipate. And then as that interface matures, it may be a little bit more solid and may not need to understand and learn new concepts and new information every single day. Maybe it's a weekly cadence. But I think it's also important to think about how those interfaces, as they mature, then evolve. So as interfaces kind of mature, they may want to start to express new types of information, be a little bit more temporal with what's happening day to day. And so that might be about developing and refreshing content and looking at the conversational interaction and how users kind of grow throughout that interaction, as well as how your interface grows to respond. I think that in GUI interface design, we called this progressive disclosure, and it was kind of like as users became more familiar with your interface, you would progressively disclose more information and maybe make some information more abstract. So an example of that is a navigation bar where you have clearly labeled navigation items, and then as the user interacts with that interface, those words go away and just the icons remain, because we've assumed that maybe the user understands kind of the placement and the location of those things and has a mental model of what those icons mean. And that's something that we can kind of similarly do in conversational interfaces, because again, we're thinking back to those assumptions that we're expecting our users to build around our conversational interfaces and the assumptions that they have about what we know about them. And so evolving that conversational interface really makes it feel natural as the users kind of interact throughout the lifespan of their interaction with your product and the lifespan of the interface itself. So the process that I walk through from kind of gathering those users' insights and starting by listening to users to understanding what those users are actually saying, processing that information, and then crafting really awesome, amazing responses back to those users is not always that quite linear or smooth. Once you start to analyze how your users are interacting with your company and with your interface, chances are that that conversational design, will start to bleed over into more traditional interfaces. So it'll start to bleed over into how maybe the emails are composed, how social media writes messages or posts on social media, how support call centers may rewrite scripts. Those are all different conversational touch points that can be influenced by conversational design. Even just a simple pop-up dialogue can be influenced by the way that you think about your users in this conversational interaction space. So my final note is to iterate, collaborate, and most importantly, evangelize the work you're doing for your organization, within your organization and within the community around you, so that you can really truly make your conversational design efforts impact all the other aspects of the interface and improve those interfaces to make them more intuitive and usable by your users. So that's all I have. Thanks so much, and I'm open for questions. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is around having various disciplines kind of within your writing team, whether it be like a digital interface or information architecture or copywriting, and what they all bring to the table when, and kind of the challenges. So I think a lot of times the challenge falls into those silos or those kind of safe spaces that we all get into, where like an information architect might want to focus on the logic of the way things move in the system and focus on the conversation flows and not really pay attention to the crafting a really great response and voice and tone, even though they may be responsible for that element as well. And so I think it's about bringing those people together and aligning them on the mission. And then to kind of bring people up to speed who may be approaching it from a different perspective is kind of working through the process and actually understanding why different components of it are important. So for someone who's a copywriter and may not have to interact with the information architecture, when you start to get into a conversational design, you realize that the structure of the conversation is also very important to its meaning. And so actually working with those people to build out flows and have them kind of take the whiteboard marker and build out the flows and build out the structure, even though they might not be right, they can still learn from creating that structure and understanding how the meaning changes based on the structure. So the answer is like exercises and collaboration. It's not like a simple and streamlined, like, you know, here's this one book you could read and everyone will know what to do. Is that answer or kind of cool? And we can talk after if you want to dive in more. Anyone else have any questions? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.